Not every morning carries the sign of a turning point. Often, the real shift arrives very quietly. So quiet that if you are not truly still, cancer may pass right through it and keep living the same way as before. It feels like an ordinary moment. No event, no special message, nothing that demands your attention or forces you to stop. And yet, somewhere deep inside, something has just moved. A little lighter, a little farther away. A bond that once felt familiar in your heart no longer holds you as tightly as it used to. Cancer lives through emotion and memory. So when a connection changes without noise, without drama, a quiet question naturally rises. Am I letting go? Or am I losing something? Intuition does not answer with words. It simply whispers that this is not random. And it is from this almost invisible shift that cancer's true story begins to unfold. God understands cancer's heart in a very different way than you may have ever imagined. Not through explanations, not through judgment, but through quiet observation carried out over many years. He sees how you attach to others not only through emotion, but through memory, through small routines, through responsibilities no one ever asked you to carry, yet you took them on anyway. He sees how long you remember, how deeply you hold on, how you love without noise, with a steadiness so constant that you forget how heavy it has become. So when something that once mattered deeply is taken away too suddenly, cancer does not blame the situation. You turn inward. You revisit every detail, every word spoken, every past decision, asking yourself where you went wrong. God knows this, and He does not want your heart to carry another wound, so He does not choose to cut things off. He chooses to soften them, not through a dramatic event, but through changes so small they are almost invisible. A cord that once held your emotions tightly begins to loosen, little by little, as if it understands that it no longer needs to pull so hard. You still care, but you no longer lie awake in worry. You still remember, but your chest no longer feels heavy when a name passes through your mind. The urge to protect, to hold everything together at all costs, slowly settles, like water calming after the wind has passed. Not because you have grown cold, but because you are being guided out of a weight you have carried for far too long. What makes this shift so profound is that it does not begin in thought. It begins in feeling. Your body recognizes it before your mind can explain it. Your shoulders soften. Your breath deepens. Your heart no longer feels tight. These signs do not speak of loss. They speak of protection, of someone who saw everything you endured in silence and decided you no longer needed to carry it alone. For cancer, love has always come with responsibility. You stay longer than necessary. You try one more time even when you are already exhausted. You believe that with enough patience, everything will work itself out. But there are seasons in life when that patience no longer nourishes you and quietly begins to drain your life force instead. God does not fault you for loving this way. He does not ask you to change how you love. He simply guides you away from imbalance before your heart has to pay too high a price for its kindness. This withdrawal carries no pain. It feels like a gentle hand on your shoulder, reminding you that you do not need to prove love by wearing yourself down. And when something leaves without conflict, without argument, without the need to hold on, that is a very clear sign. Its role has been completed. You did not love too little. You did nothing wrong. That connection fulfilled its purpose in your growth. Instead of being taken from you, it is set down at exactly the right time. You may notice this through a very subtle feeling. You no longer need to explain. You stop searching for a final answer. You feel no urgency to understand every detail. What once filled your entire inner world now rests quietly within it, enough to remember, but no longer pulling you backward. This is when the weight leaves your shoulders without creating a painful emptiness. Only a long exhale you did not realize you had been holding. And when that lightness remains long enough, another awareness begins to form, slowly, deeply, like light slipping through a door that has just begun to open, guiding you forward into a wider, brighter inner space where your heart is about to learn how to rest in an entirely new rhythm. When the cord that once held your emotions has been loose for long enough, cancer begins to notice an empty space forming inside. Not the kind of emptiness that makes the heart sink, not the familiar hollow feeling that follows something leaving. It arrives very gently, almost politely, as if it asked permission before staying. At first, you may sit with that feeling and wonder what you did wrong. Are you letting go, or are you losing something? Intuition does not rush to answer. It allows you to remain in that space long enough to feel it for yourself. And the strange thing is, no fear rises, no panic, no urgency to fill the silence. Only a rare kind of calm that Cancer does not often allow into their life. This space feels like a room that has just been cleared after years of holding other people's belongings. The air begins to move again. Light slips into corners that were once always hidden. You realize you can take a full, deep breath without wondering who might need you right now, without checking someone else's emotions before listening to your own. For Cancer, this is a new experience. You are used to always having someone to think about, something to worry over, a quiet responsibility that keeps you anchored in place. When that settles, the stillness can feel unfamiliar, but it is not cold. It is warm in its own way, like an unhurried morning where no one asks you to be anything other than yourself. This space does not carry the name of loss, because it takes nothing that truly belongs to you. It simply returns the room you gave away long ago without realizing it. Within this quiet, you begin to hear smaller things more clearly. Your own breathing, the sensation in your chest when you are no longer keeping time for someone else. Thoughts no longer crowd each other, no longer compete for attention. You realize it has been a long time since you could sit still without feeling guilty. No need to explain, no need to justify, no need to brace yourself for a difficult conversation. And in this silence, a very gentle truth begins to surface. Your presence in other people's lives was real. It mattered. It carried meaning. But that does not mean you must carry them through every season of your life. Some connections complete their purpose by opening a lesson, then quietly stepping aside so you have room to grow. Cancer does not always see this right away. You are used to holding on longer than necessary, believing that sincere love should never be left unfinished. But some bonds do not need to last to prove their worth. They fulfill their role by teaching you how to love, how to care, and eventually, how to place yourself where you truly belong. This space does not ask you to forget the past. It simply places the past where it belongs. Not heavy, not pulling at you. The memories remain, but they no longer demand that you live inside them. You can remember without pain. You can think back without being pulled behind. This does not happen through effort. It arrives when you feel safe enough to stop protecting yourself by enduring. And when that sense of safety spreads deeply enough, a subtle movement begins inside you. Not excitement, not determination. Just a quiet awareness that you are no longer standing in the same old space. As if the ground beneath your feet has shifted slightly, just enough for you to realize you are standing somewhere new. A place where you can move forward without carrying emotional debt. And within that silent movement, your heart begins to ask very different questions. No longer about who you need to hold on to, but about what allows you to live more honestly as yourself. No longer centered on holding anyone in place, your attention begins to turn toward what allows you to live more truthfully as yourself. And in the very moment those questions shift direction, something subtle begins to happen. Not in your thoughts, but in the place you usually overlook. Your body speaks before the mind has time to name it. One day, you notice your chest does not feel as heavy as it used to. Your shoulders drop slightly, as if they no longer need to balance so many things at once. Your breath moves deeper without being reminded. There is no clear reason, no special moment to mark it. Just the feeling of being at rest inside yourself. Natural. Real. These changes do not carry the shape of loss. They carry the shape of protection. As if someone has watched you for a very long time in the role of the one who carries, the one who stays, the one who listens and endures, and then quietly steps in without disturbing anything. No long explanations. Just a presence close enough for you to feel that you no longer have to tense yourself to prove anything. You do not need to be strong in ways that wear you down. You do not need to be resilient to the point of forgetting what rest feels like. As this understanding settles in, You begin to realize how long you have lived in a state of readiness, ready to absorb other people's emotions, ready to stay when things become difficult, ready to sacrifice your own peace to keep everything around you from falling apart. You called that love, and it was love. But love does not have to mean that your body is always bracing itself. When the weight is finally set down, not through a forceful decision, but through a gentle permission, your body responds as if it has been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Your heart rate slows. The constant alertness dissolves. You no longer scan the space around you to see who might not be okay. You no longer tense yourself, guessing how your words or your silence might affect someone else. In that settling, you begin to feel something that sounds simple, but changes everything. Safety is not when everything outside you is calm. Safety is when nothing inside you has to brace itself anymore. True protection does not come from closing your heart. It comes from not allowing it to be pulled back into places that drain it. You can still love. You can still care, but no longer at the cost of losing yourself. When your body is finally allowed to rest, an old layer of exhaustion begins to leave. Quietly, without drama. You simply stop feeling like you have to struggle to exist inside connections that have long caused you to shrink. The lightness that follows feels different from joy, different from excitement. It is a quiet steadiness, like standing on solid ground after a long journey spent trying to keep your balance. You begin to trust the small signals within you, the tightening when something no longer fits, the gentle opening when you are in the right place, at the right rhythm. No confirmation needed. No promises required. From this listening, a new order slowly forms. Not a plan, but a felt sense. You know where to stay, where to step back, what to open your heart to, and what to allow to pass without holding on. Everything becomes clear without needing explanation. As if once the body is freed from its old weight, the heart begins to relearn its natural rhythm. The rhythm that guides you forward, lighter, slower, and more aligned with who you truly are than ever before. That clarity slowly leads you into a very deep understanding. Not the kind that comes from logic, but a quiet recognition rising from within. That some connections enter your life not to stay forever, but to fulfill a very specific role in your growth. They were real. They mattered. They carried undeniable meaning. But that does not mean they were meant to follow you through every season of your life. When you become still enough to look back, you begin to notice that some things leave without conflict. No arguments, no emotional explosions, no words that later need to be taken back in regret. They depart as gently as they once arrived. And that gentleness is the clearest sign of all. Their role has been completed, not because you are no longer worthy, not because you loved too little, but because that connection did exactly what it needed to do for you. It taught you how to attach. It taught you how to care. It taught you how to stay. And finally, it taught you that you no longer need to hold on tightly to prove anything. When this understanding settles, an old weight begins to dissolve inside Cancer's heart. The weight of blaming yourself each time something does not continue. The habit of replaying the past, searching for where you went wrong. The tendency to measure your worth by the length of a relationship. The belief that an ending always means failure. You begin to see completion through a different lens, more mature, more compassionate. Some things do not need to last to prove they were real. Some connections do not need to stay to confirm that they held value. They complete their mission by leaving behind a part of you that could not have formed without them. And as this truth settles, a very particular calm appears. Not the kind that hides loss, but the feeling of a circle closing fully. No heavy echo. No lingering pull that makes you turn back again and again. Only a quiet agreement between your heart and the flow of life itself. You begin to allow yourself to look at past connections with appreciation instead of longing. You see them as paths you have already walked. No need to return. No need to deny them. You can remember without pain. You can reflect without feeling left behind. And within this acceptance, something important shifts. You stop tying your value to being chosen to stay. You no longer feel the need to prove you are enough by remaining longer than necessary. You understand that growth is not always shown by holding on. Sometimes it is shown by knowing when something has fulfilled its role. For Cancer, this is a profound lesson, because your heart is used to preserving, used to extending connections out of fear that meaning will disappear if you let go. But now, you see clearly that true meaning does not live in what is held, but in what was formed within you along the way. The gentleness you developed, the patience you cultivated, the ability to love deeply without needing noise. None of these disappear when a bond comes to an end. They remain as part of who you are. And as you stand firmly in this awareness, a new space begins to open. Not a void that needs to be filled, but a wide, safe openness where you no longer step into connections out of fear of loneliness or the habit of staying. You become more selective without closing off, more tender without making yourself smaller. From this quiet completion, your heart begins to sense a different rhythm of life. One where what enters next does not need to compete with the past, but is welcomed by an inner world mature enough to know what belongs with you forward and what can now be set down with peace. When the weight is truly set down, the first thing Cancer notices is not emptiness, but a feeling that is unfamiliar and quietly profound. You do not become cold, as the fear once whispered you might. Instead, you become clearer. Clearer in how you feel. Clearer in how you listen to yourself. Clearer in recognizing what comes from love and what comes from a habit of enduring for far too long. This clarity carries no judgment. It does not turn you away from anyone. It simply stops you from losing yourself just to keep everything else calm. For the first time in a very long while, you no longer feel responsible for other people's happiness. The fear that someone might fall apart if you let go begins to fade. The worry that you might become meaningless if you stop begins to loosen. A truth settles in, gentle, yet powerful. Your value does not come from being needed. Your presence does not have to be proven through constant sacrifice. You do not have to play the role of the one who holds everything up in order to be loved. When this understanding takes root, it does not arrive as a loud transformation. It changes you from the inside through small, quiet shifts. In how you decide, in how you say yes or no, in how you stay with a feeling instead of pushing it aside to tend to someone else's emotions. From January 3rd, 2026, a new inner order begins to form. Very quiet, very private, yet deeply stable. No one else needs to know. This order does not ask you to become someone different. You remain gentle. You remain deep. You still know how to care and how to love. But love no longer makes you smaller. It no longer asks you to shrink, to go silent, to strain yourself to fit an old shape. You begin to see that a healthy bond does not require you to trade your peace. It does not force you to choose between presence and inner safety. It does not demand that you hold the rhythm for both sides. Within this new order, you are allowed to love without being pulled away, allowed to open your heart without losing your boundaries, allowed to care without erasing your own needs. You no longer enter relationships trying to prove your worth. You enter by choice. And that choice allows you to be fully present in a way you never were before. A feeling that is both familiar and entirely new begins to return. The feeling of being at home within yourself. No effort required, no defenses raised, no need to prepare for the worst outcome. Just a gentle safety spreading outward from within, like the moment you realize you no longer need to turn back to check if you left something behind. You are not pulled into the past. You are not rushing toward the future. You stand at your own center, steady enough to feel each step as it comes. From that place, the road ahead no longer feels heavy. What enters your life next will not need to compete with old burdens. It will arrive in a space that has been cleared, where your heart no longer has to strain to keep its balance. You are being guided back to where you belong, not to a distant destination but to full presence within yourself. There, you do not need to be stronger. You do not need to endure more. You only need to be yourself. Lighter, safer, and peaceful enough to continue loving in a way that no longer harms a heart that has already weathered so many storms.